As we consider the start of a new decade, the outlook for 2020, it's also an opportunity to reflect on the decade that just ended. And taking stock of the past 10 years for U.S. coal feels a little bit like a roller coaster ride. There were some good markets and good times early in the decade, mounting challenges by mid-decade, and a mixed bag of better policy and regulatory support, but weaker domestic markets later in the decade. Coal continues to be the leading fuel source for electric generation globally. I know you heard that earlier, but just in case you've been here for so long that you forgot, I thought I should mention it again. Total coal consumption worldwide is about 8 billion tons. The International Energy Agency expects coal use to remain broadly stable in the coming years. This will reflect continued growth in China, India, and Southeast Asia, and continued declines in the United States and Europe. U.S. coal is shipped to both domestic and international customers and used to make electricity, steel, and other industrial products. While the export market segment is important to U.S. coal, the domestic power sector has traditionally accounted for 85% or more of U.S. coal demand. Coal faces intense pressure in this market segment. The U.S. electricity resource mix continues to be characterized by growing natural gas and renewables capacity, while coal capacity continues to be shut down. This has significant implications. Natural gas is primarily a just-in-time fuel, and renewables are variable, producing electricity as available rather than as needed. Our nation's coal plants are critical assets that directly support the reliability and resilience of the electric grid. They are dispatchable, so they can run anytime 24/7. They store inventory on site, so they're fuel secure. They are ready to be deployed as needed to assure that electricity supply meets demand every minute. These are indispensable attributes, and coal plants can contribute at a level above their weight because of them. In the winter, home heating is the top priority for the use of natural gas. During cold weather periods, when electricity demand surges, there may not be enough gas available for both home heating and electric generation in some regions at some times. Solar and wind resources are intermittent. Their availability may not match up to electricity demand patterns, especially when demand surges in extreme hot or cold weather. 2019 provided continuing examples of the vulnerabilities of the changing power sector resource mix. During a 2019 polar vortex event in the upper Midwest, there were problems with natural gas systems and a drop in wind production during a bitterly cold period in January. The drop in wind occurred due to automatic shutoffs of wind turbines in the extremely cold temperatures. This was unanticipated. Generation forecasts had overestimated the wind resource contribution by as much as 8 gigawatts in the MISO electricity region. That's over 56% of the installed wind generation in that region. A MISO maximum generation event was triggered. Electricity conservation measures were instituted to reduce usage. In some cases, residents were asked to turn thermostats down to 63 degrees. Automakers canceled shifts and idled plants, and there was wide closure of businesses and schools. It was coal that came through, providing the highest share of electricity during this critical polar vortex event. Last summer, Texas provided another example of the impacts of the changing resource mix and the risks of moving away from coal. Faced with high temperatures and near-record electric demand, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, issued 2 emergency energy alerts during the week of August 12th. Customers were asked to turn thermostats up, stop using large appliances, and shut off pool pumps. And yes, that's a thing, shutting off pool pumps. I understand that it's harmful to the mechanisms. Businesses were asked to reduce usage, and large consumers were requested to shut down or reduce non-essential production. ERCOT had not issued an emergency energy alert since 2014. Available generating resources had dropped during this hot August week, and ERCOT cited lower wind production as one of the reasons. Wind generation was reported at only 1 gigawatt at one time during August 15th. This is of more than 20 gigawatts of wind capacity in the ERCOT region. With fewer coal plants in the mix to backstop other resources, the risk of these types of incidences and interruptions may increase. More than 40% of the coal fleet in 2010 has retired or announced retirement. EIA estimates about 13 gigawatts retired in 2019 and about 6 will retire in 2020. And some private sources are already estimating even higher retirements in 2020. And no new coal generation is being added, unlike natural gas and renewables. EIA projects 2020 capacity additions of 11 gigawatts for natural gas, 24 gigawatts for solar, and 19 gigawatts for wind. Policymakers should not expect that closing additional coal and nuclear plants and relying even more on just-in-time fuel and variable generation sources will provide the same system reliability and resilience experienced in the past. Fuel security was analyzed by America's Power, which found that almost 40% of our nation's total electric generation capacity is not fuel secure. Their analysis included natural gas capacity without dual fuel capability combined with renewables capacity. Polling has shown that nearly 3/4 of Americans believe in an all-of-the-above energy strategy that includes coal, natural gas, nuclear power, and renewables. It also shows that more than half of Americans think the U.S. government should support coal and nuclear plants, given their ability to produce electricity 24/7 and their use of fuel stored on site. Jobs are another important aspect of the energy business. The coal sector accounts for about 400,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs. The average wage for a coal miner is more than $80,000 per year, about twice as much as a solar installer. Coal-related jobs are vitally important to the states and communities where coal is mined, transported, and used in power plants, steelmaking facilities, and industrial applications. These jobs make the difference between thriving local and regional economies and those plagued by unemployment and its undesirable side effects. It would be short-sighted and misguided to assume that coal sector jobs can be replaced and that task forces and retraining can actually produce high-quality, durable jobs in other industries. Favorable factors for coal include continuing federal regulatory reform and rebalancing. Finalizing EPA's Affordable Clean Energy rule in 2019 was a big step. EPA's continuing efforts to revise and clarify regulations are important for planning and compliance by coal power plants. The CEQ's new National Environmental Policy Act regulations address many barriers that have plagued energy and infrastructure development for years. Those regulations incorporate sensible and long overdue reforms that will facilitate streamlined, more timely, and better coordinated environmental reviews. In Congress, the year-end spending bill included funding for the Department of Energy's fossil R&D program at the highest level in a decade. DOE is making progress in important areas. This includes the Coal First initiative, also mentioned this morning, and as well as advancing research on production of rare earth elements from coal and coal combustion products. Additionally, DOE is supporting projects to develop applications for the carbon in coal to be used in products such as carbon fiber, carbon foam, graphene, and graphite. DOE also continues work on CCS with a sharp focus on bringing down its cost. Congressional interest dovetails with DOE's initiatives. Last summer, the Utilizing Significant Emissions with Innovative Technologies, or USEA Act, was passed by the Senate. This bill supports CO2 emissions reduction by advancing CCUS technologies. This includes improving the permitting process for CCUS infrastructure projects. It would also encourage other technology innovations such as direct air capture of CO2 from the atmosphere. And it would promote the beneficial use of CO2 in industrial products. With more discourse about reducing CO2 emissions, there should be even more opportunity for collaboration. But ways to address CO2 emissions have to make sense for business and the economy. They must provide opportunities to create value, not destroy it. And being a leader in developing these applications provides a path for the U.S. to export them. U.S. CO2 emissions from the power sector have been decreasing, but CO2 emissions from the power sector in much of the rest of the world have been increasing. So the global aspects must be considered, as must the fact that coal has enabled a good deal of the electrification of emerging economies and improvement in the quality of people's lives. BP's Statistical Review of World Energy Report has noted that coal's share of global power generation is 38%, and that hasn't changed in 2 decades. Obviously, it's a bigger pie today, considering population increases and much greater electricity usage. Coal power plants continue to be built and run. There is at least 300 gigawatts of new coal generation capacity under construction in Asia alone. That is more than the entire existing U.S. coal power plant fleet. And the average age of the coal power plant fleet in Asia, as was mentioned earlier, is about 11 or 12 years. Those plants will be running for decades. Evaluation of energy resources must encompass their full life cycle costs and environmental impacts. The often touted attribute of renewables is that they are low or zero carbon emitters. However, that is only one piece of their environmental impact, which includes using massive amounts of resources in the production of solar panels and wind turbines. Many of these resources and materials are mined or made outside the U.S. in countries with far less stringent environmental and labor standards than ours. The land footprint is also far greater for wind and solar than for a coal plant. The additional generation capacity needed from other resources, including coal, in order for them to be ready to fill the availability gaps of renewables is inefficient and costly. It adds to the negative environmental impact of renewables because without them, redundant capacity is not needed. Also, the environmental and cost impacts of transmission projects to bring power from renewables to population centers must be taken into account. And finally, end-of-life decommissioning and disposal aspects must be considered. Coal generation in the U.S. has already been reduced from a share of 45% in 2010 to about 25%. With new coal plants not currently being built, it's even more important to retain the remaining coal power plant fleet. Our nation will benefit from doing so. A diverse generation portfolio, including coal, which acts as both a market and operational hedge, protects reliable, resilient electricity and affordable prices for consumers. Thank you very much.